All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of The Partnership. I'm here today in Partner Look with Tai, who is the head of partnerships at Deel and previously at Optimizely and Amplitude. Today is coming up to be a huge episode for us with over 100 RSVPs live on LinkedIn. And as a thank you to everybody who's joining us today, I wanted to announced that we're doing another giveaway. And so today we're giving away a copy of the Zumo Advantage, which is one of my favorite partnerships books. It's all about how to partner with huge giants of the industry and leverage them to grow in any market. So if you want to win this copy of the Zumo Advantage, simply here enter in the chat today hashtag this ship in order to enter this raffle. So it's really easy. You just enter hashtag the ship into the chat, and then you're automatically added to the raffle. And with that, Tai, let's take it away. I have a first question for you. This is all about global expansion. So the first question will be, when is the right time to expand globally, and how did you make that decision?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for having me. And any excuse to be able to wear Hawaiian shirts, I'm very happy to do so. I think it depends on the company. Like for Deel is really an exception where we operate in over 120 countries around the world, and our business is global in nature. I think for anyone that's working at a global business like Deel, where it's a requirement to operate the business, you have to expand globally from day one. And so I think we'll consider Deel an outlier. Deel is an outlier for a lot of reasons. And maybe we can talk about Amplitude and Optimizely as better examples for like the everyday tech company that people are working at, even though, both fantastic companies, but kind of more of a standard go-to-market. And so, the question, like, when is the right time to expand globally? This was like perfect for my experience at Amplitude. Like we were, I would say, 10 million ARR, and we had a team in North America, and things were going really well. And we sent some folks over to EMEA, to Amsterdam, to open the European office. And the thinking there was, okay, like we figured something out. We have like a steady state of go to market within the US, and we're thinking about what are our avenues for growth. And so one of the growth levers that we identified was new channels. And so that's why I was hired from a partnerships perspective. And then another lever was new regions, which was why we opened the Amsterdam office. And then another growth lever for us was like new customer personas. So we were selling into kind of SMB, maybe mid-market startups. And we decided to like really focus on going after enterprise business at the same time. And so those were like strategic bets that we made as a business. And so like the readiness from that front comes from the executive level, where there's prioritization around making these types of bets and focus areas. Like the story of how we ended up like focusing on resellers actually kind of is a part of this question as well, which is like, when is a company ready to expand globally? And I think you can think about global expansion in like a few different categories of or like tiers of markets, and it comes down to like how difficult that market is to enter. And so, a market, if you're a US based startup, or you're in Berlin, or you're in Amsterdam, or you're in London, or you're in Paris, like moving to those other markets is like fairly straightforward. Like save for maybe France, where the business culture is a little bit more different, but like the business culture is fairly similar. Like the English fluency rate is fairly high, especially in like the kind of tech and like white collar workspace. And so like the ability to be able to buy or to sell software and other products across these different markets, it's not a crazy heavy strain on your organization to be able to go and do that. And so like start globally, with a website in English that anyone can access, and like you'll pretty quickly figure out, okay, are people buying our product from the UK or from the Netherlands or from France or wherever else, and like those are interesting markets to go and potentially expand into. The other categories of countries or regions are where the difficulty starts to like really increase, where there's like very different business cultures and also lower English fluency rates, or like a really high price sensitivity, dependent on the market. And so like if tier one is those countries that I mentioned already that are like super easy to do, tier two might be countries like Korea, Japan, China, where there's still like a propensity to spend a material amount on products and software, but like the business practices are really difficult. And then like tier three, where you kind of are thinking about like India, Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, places that still have like a large and interesting population for products, but there's a huge amount of price sensitivity around getting products out into the market. And so when you're considering when is the right time to expand globally, expanding into that tier one category of countries is like you can do that fairly quickly. Number two is like quite resource intensive. And then number three is like really an ROI decision on like, do you even want to or need to expand into those markets based on the price sensitivity? Or are you just going to allow like a regional player to own that market? Which, there is like a regional player for pretty much every tier one SaaS
Yeah.
company in all of these markets. And I can talk about it a bunch more, but that's kind of how I think about the readiness.
Got it. It's so interesting because it's very similar to what we experienced at Hopin. So, for everybody who's not aware of what Hopin is, we're a virtual events company. And during the pandemic, we quickly rose to a very large valuation, very large customer base because all the events globally had to shift onto online. And what was interesting was that basically, like you described, like the tier one countries, so the countries you would normally target as a startup, which would be most of the US and Northern America, and then also Europe and Australia, New Zealand, others, they basically just start using our platform anyways because it was an English website. There was no boundaries set to it. The only limitation was that our support wasn't 24/7 yet. So if you're in New Zealand, it was hard to reach us, but everything else was actually really easy to get set up. And then the tier two countries and other countries were the ones where we actually had to put more deliberate effort into expanding. Um, before we move on, I just want to give a shout out to some of our friends in the audience, including Andres, Mary, Dylan, and Agia, who are joining us today live. Thank you so much. If you have any questions for Tai as well about global expansion and partnerships, make sure to drop them in the comments because we want to make sure that we answer your questions today as well. So then, for me, another big question is how do you identify your initial target markets? Because, or maybe before that, how do you make sure that right now is the time to expand versus actually time to dig deeper, right? Because a lot of companies might think that they hit a growth ceiling. Everybody wants more revenue, but they actually underestimate how much investment it takes to go abroad, right? So, how do you know that you actually capped out in the United States, in Europe, in other places, and know that now is the right time to go into Korea or Japan?
Yeah.
Versus maybe doubling down more in order to not lose your hold on that market.
That is a fantastic question, and it is the question, because the reality is, like a company only has a finite amount of resources, and when you decide to expand into another market, you want to have at least had a good hypothesis around the ROI of the dollars that you're going to be spending in that market. And like, so like, because a dollar spent in your US go to market model, you kind of know what you're going to get back from that, right? And so then if you're going to spend $1 in Japan, or like $1 in Korea, like you want to have a rough ROI understanding of what you're going to get back from that, and like what the time horizon is to see a return. And for a lot of companies, number one, they just haven't even thought about that. They're just assuming, okay, like if we put people out in this region or whatever, like we're going to see incremental revenue. But it's somewhat zero sum when it comes to a company's resources, because the other factor to consider outside of just ROI of the dollar spend is that, like, as soon as you start putting people or resellers or any type of focus on an international market, there's two things that happen. One thing is that a percentage of resource is going to be removed from your primary market, right? So like, where you're seeing maybe like $10 back for every dollar, and you're putting it into a market where you're only seeing like $1 back for the dollar that you put in, you're actually going to see like a reduction in perform, or at least like a reduction in potential growth in your core market. The other thing that you're going to see is, like, although you think that you're making a small bet, the like the resource that is required for that market snowballs and compounds. So like,
Mhm.
you hire one person, great. Like, oh yeah, that's only 150K a year for that person, right? But then that salesperson wants case studies, and they want like webinars for their market, and they want, like a sales engineer and an SDR, and then like, their customers need additional support, and then they're talking about translating the product, and you, like, very quickly a small bet can turn into like a really, really large suck on your core business. And so it's like
Yeah.
it has to be like a really considered decision. And so like, that's actually how I ended up setting up the reseller business initially at Amplitude. So I was fortunate that working at American Express at the start of my career, I had a bunch of exposure to like co-branded strategies in markets that we decided not to enter ourselves. So I was a small part of the project American Express to launch a partnership with ABN AMRO, which is like one of the top two banks in the Netherlands. And rather than American Express setting up their own office and everything in the Netherlands, we just decided to partner with ABN AMRO and issue like a co-branded card in those markets. And so like, when I kind of saw firsthand all of the support benefits and marketing benefits and distribution and everything else of just leveraging a partner in that market. And so that makes a bunch of sense, right? Like, you kind of save on a ton of those resource investments that are required, and you kind of test the market a little bit. And so then when I went and joined Optimizely, we actually ended up launching, we opened an office in Japan, for instance, like a physical office. We hired a bunch of great people out there. We sent a handful of our best people to Japan, and we also hired a bunch of really strong people in Japan. And we still just didn't crack that market. And there's 100 reasons for that I could dig into. But the resource intensity and the compounding of that resources over time, we ended up having to just say, hey, we have to pull out of this market
Yeah.
entirely, because
I
it's just a drag.
Yeah, I would love to double down on that actually. Like, how did you identify Japan even as a target? Or in hindsight, why do you think Japan wasn't the right target, right? Like, what
Yeah.
made that decision and what turned out to be wrong about that decision?
Yeah, so I want to talk about like the framework that I built at Amplitude for this based on those learnings. But for Japan, we identified that Japan is a very tech savvy market. They buy premium products both from a like consumer perspective, but also from a software perspective. They have a high propensity to spend. We also kind of had like a very passionate following in Japan already. Like, someone we wrote an A/B testing book at Optimizely, and someone translated that book into Japanese and like put it on Amazon and was selling it. And like, there's a bunch of people that were just super excited
That's a
about
great signal, yeah.
Optimizely, yeah, and what we were doing in Japan. So we were like, hey, there's a bunch of interest in this market. Let's go and try it out. The
Yeah.
reality is, the one for anyone that's ever done business in Japan, it's a it's definitely a face-to-face business culture, like lots of handshaking, very hierarchical. And so you have to like make your way through organizations very slowly. It's almost like the inverse of how American businesses operate. And so like, it's very slow moving. And for like an innovative company like Optimizely, where like we were kind of testing a lot of norms, and we were stepping on a lot of teams' toes. Like, we were stepping on the web development team's toes, and we were stepping on like traditional marketing teams' toes, like when people were bringing in our product. And so, like that level of cultural change, like within a business, like in a very hierarchical organization, just wasn't happening
Right.
for us. So like here's an analogy, right? Like a company that is using Adobe and they're like really bought in on Adobe, there's like a bunch of stakeholders in that business that are like trained on Adobe, have a career around Adobe, and it's really hard to rip out Adobe and put in Optimizely, right?
Yeah.
Imagine that, but like 100 times more. You know, where it's like people's like all of their like trust, and no one wants to upset each other or insult each other. And so, like the business culture uh, made it really challenging for a small and scrappy team like ours to be able to go into that market. And so,
Yeah.
to your question around like how do you identify markets and like I want to share the learnings from that experience and what we did it differently at Amplitude based on that. um
Yeah. I'd love to hear the framework.
yeah, so like I built out a frame. So what happened, this is really funny because like I'm like quite often like I'm motivated by like not making mistakes rather
Yeah.
than like taking big bets, right? And so what happened at Amplitude was we were talking about launching an office either in Japan or Korea. And the reason why we were thinking about that was, again, like at Optimizely, we were seeing interest in these markets. Like we had a couple of Korean customers already. We were getting some leads in Korea and Japan, and there was like some appetite in those markets. And so at the executive level, we were talking about, okay, should we just hire like a couple of people out in the market and see what happens? And I was like, oh no, like I've seen this story before. And so I said to our COO at the time, I was like, hey, like I think that these markets are perfect for resellers. And like I kind of put together a whole pitch and a model for it. But I said, like, you know, the way that we can identify a market that's perfect for a reseller is they have a high number of our target customers still. So, like Korea, for instance, has a ton of startups, like really cool startups, an amazing startup ecosystem, but they have a really low English fluency rate versus like European countries. And they also have like a different business culture to ours, like a very hierarchical, like relationship, shake hands business culture, which is just like, you have to take people out and you have to meet them several
Yeah.
times just to even like get in the door. And so we basically built like a score based on those different criteria and like pulled the number of product managers and startups and like all of the data that would identify ICPs for Amplitude, and then kind of cross-referenced it with what's the English fluency rate of the country, and like what's the like we came up with like a difficulty score from a business culture perspective, and then we just had like a really clear like list of countries that were perfect for us to go into with resellers rather than directly. And so because like in Japan, we would have found out they want us to translate the product in order for them to use it themselves rather
Yeah.
than through a reseller where everyone can use it in English. And so our top markets for that ended up being Korea, Japan, Russia, Brazil, and China. And so that was like a really easy model for us to identify these initial target markets. So I
Got
put
it.
together that model, said to my CEO, like, please let me take a run at this first, because I just don't want us to like throw a bunch of our resources and time and efforts to try and go to market directly in these countries and like maybe lose like a year or 2 years of productivity because of that. Unfortunately, they said yes, and I was able to go and try that out.
Yeah, it's amazing that you were able to like take that experience from Optimizely and apply it at Amplitude and like really leverage your playbook to expand abroad. And also like how strategic you were about like making sure that, you evaluate like all these like ICP, just the difficulty of doing business there and so forth in order to make that assessment. I'm curious, like when you decided like, hey, resellers are the way for us, how did you identify and onboard and enable partners, right? Like, were they all English speaking partners? I assume so, because otherwise they couldn't talk to you. But like, how do you even make sure like who do you talk to when you say I want to go like to Japan now?
Yeah. Yeah. So we built out like a whole framework for this as well. I called it Spear, like as in tip of the spear, and it was special processes for entering any region. I think was like the was it's like
You
very
gotta have a catchy acronym.
it was
Like,
very catchy. I was it's like on the full sale of hey, like don't spend too much time and money on this stuff. But like so we had a few different ports of call once we knew the markets that we wanted to go after. First one, and I have to give a massive shout out to Matt Roberts from Braze for this. We went around to our partners and we tried to figure out who was being successful in these markets already. And so
mhm,
all of our closest tech partners, we kind of said, hey, like, are any of you operating in these markets? How are you doing it? Like, who are your partners? And Matt McRoberts from Braze had cracked this nut already completely. Like, he'd
yeah.
really solved the problem already. And so he already had a great partner in Korea. And so that's where we kind of started. Like, and he was willing to introduce me to them. And so what I did was I took my at the time he was a CSM that was kind of moonlighting on my team, Will Chang, and I took him and we went on this insane trip across Asia and we spent like a day in each country that we thought might be interesting. We like just identified any company that we thought would potentially be a reseller, and I'll talk a little bit more about that criteria as well. But any company that we thought potentially could be a reseller, like small ones, big ones, and we spent a day in Thailand, and then we went to like Singapore, and then we went to Korea, and we went to like just ticked off Taiwan and all of these different countries, met with these people, and tried to get a read on like who out of these people kind of has the right things to be able to like be
Yeah.
take us to market in these regions. Um, and like
Awesome.
the things that we were looking for, and we can
Mhm.
go like basically our belief, and this ended up being correct, or like our hypothesis was that like we needed a team to basically be our go-to market in that region. So we didn't want like a traditional reseller where maybe they resell like 100 products and they just have like a big sales team and they like they're talking about all of the like a menu of different things. What we were looking for is like small companies or really big companies, but they were going to take a really big bet on us. And so they
Yeah.
would have like salespeople, support people, marketing, like customer success. We were going to build out like a whole go to market organization within their company. They'd have their own website, like that was the Amplitude website, but in that region we were going to give them all of the leads on that, like train them to do their own conferences, like the whole thing, right? And so we were going out and we were trying to
Okay.
find like who are the few people that we can make a bet on. Because remember, my hypothesis or like my whole problem with this was like I didn't want us to drain go-to-market resources from our core market by doing this international market. And so I needed to establish all of these go-to-market resources in these markets so that they wouldn't be asking our marketing team for case studies or our marketing team for all of that stuff. And so like we built a bunch of criteria to assess like could these companies be that partner in these markets.
Yeah. There's an incredible amount of good stuff just in that one response. Like the first thing I take away is like you leverage partners in order to find the partners in that region. I think that's such a great near-bound playbook for global expansion is that once you conquered your target markets, you then go to your partners and ask like, can you help us expand into the region together? That's a great one. And then the second thing, which I would love to drill down deeper on, is you said like you preferred small partners over these large partners because you could build out your own orgs. Does that mean like the traditional playbook of like working with like a Fujitsu in Japan or a Tata in India is something you would not recommend to anybody in this SaaS space who wants to go global?
Yeah, so we saw success with both. So like in Japan, our really successful reseller ended up being NTT Docomo, which is a gigantic corporation in Japan. Like if you walk around Tokyo, you're going to see their billboards everywhere. Like they are a gigantic corporation. And in order to be able to get that deal done, we and actually like our GM of in Singapore because we at this point we'd seen a ton of success with Korea and a ton of success in Southeast Asia with our resellers, and we decided, okay, some of these markets they have a high enough English fluency rate, and like they were scoring in a different way on our criteria, and they we could go and do that business directly. And so we put people in Singapore, and we hired a GM of APAC, Julio Bermudez, who's fantastic. It's actually someone from our like Optimizely days. And so he was doing direct sales in some of these markets, and then some of the markets we were doing resellers at that point. Japan was definitely a reseller market. We ended up actually hiring a dedicated person for Japan who had a relationship with NTT Docomo already, who brought in NTT Docomo as a reseller, but like that was 100% of their effort was basically just on that one partnership. And so that was like that once we'd figured out the playbook, we could go and do that with like a really big business like that. But yeah, to start with, we saw a ton of success with teams that were like 30 people. And like, for instance, in Korea, our reseller had their own software product. They basically had like like a like they were the regional version of Apps Flyer in their market, like a marketing attribution product. And so like they could have been a technology partner for us, but they already had like sales and marketing and CS and everything else, and they were already partnering with Braze and reselling Braze in the market. And so we were just like, hey, add on Amplitude and we can figure out how to do this together. And so like
Yeah.
finding those kind of agile teams who already had similar DNA to us was really important. Like in Korea, we really worked hard on like Samsung and LG and a bunch of like large conglomerates in Korea, and really were never able to get something going like we did in Japan with NTT Docomo. And so starting small is easier because like you're going to get a faster feedback loop.
Yeah.
uh, but both worked, to be honest. In the different markets, we ended up with different reseller personas. We just had to go out and do something different in every market and figure out what worked.
Yeah, whatever works. I mean, it sounds like, yeah, leveraging your partners and starting small is like an easy way to get started fast. But then these larger resellers can probably help you like crack larger accounts and get larger reach as well. I want to take some of the audience questions because we are coming up on time. But one of the questions, or a lot of the questions, revolve around communication. So, did you find it straightforward to identify English speaking partners to construct your go to market strategy in a non English speaking region? Great question, Dylan.
Yeah, yeah, it wasn't too hard. The thing that was really helpful for us is like we took a look at our existing user data. Like a key tip number one, partners of your partners. Tip number one. Number two is look inside your existing customer database and find anyone that has a non-company domain for a company, for a customer, right? And those are all of the agencies and consultants and everything in those accounts, and just get in contact with all of them. So that's what we did. So we just like reached out to all of these consultants and agencies that we found that were located in these regions, and like 99.9% of them spoke English and like had very similar operating culture to ours.
Got it. Very, very good. And the other question we got here is question for Ty. Have you noticed differences in different countries' markets in terms of willingness to share CRM data for modern real-time account mapping?
Yeah, I mean, none of our international partners use Salesforce. To like that, you know, like if you try and do something in China, people use WeChat. Like they don't use a CRM, you know, or if they do have a CRM, they have contacts built into WeChat, but they don't use Salesforce. Like so
Yeah.
everything that we did was on Google Sheets. You know, you have to get the incentives aligned for people to share the data. And basically what we would say with resellers is like, hey, if you register that someone's your customer or someone in your network, then we'll give you exclusivity on that deal. You know, like, and if they come inbound, we'll send them to you. And so, like, all of our resellers would just list everyone that they were trying to target in a Google Sheet. And then we would do basically like pipeline reviews on those Google Sheets with the partners.
Awesome. Cool. We are coming up on time, so I want to make sure that we have enough time to do our raffle. So, just to remind everybody, we are raffling off this Sumo Advantage today. And in order to join, you just have to type hashtag the ship into the chat. It didn't recognize the first amount, like the first four hashtag the ships in the chat. So I'm going to leave this up a little bit. If you typed this before but still want to enter and you haven't been registered yet, which nobody has, feel free to type it again into the chat. And while we wait, Ty, if you have one piece of advice for anybody who wants to expand globally through partnerships, what would it be?
Yeah, I think the thing that's most important is just finding the counterpart in the region that's going to lean in and like try things out with you. You know, like if a partner's willing to do an in-person meetup in their region and they'll use your materials and like maybe you have to fly over and attend it or whatever, but like whoever's willing to lean in and put in the effort, like that's probably the best place to start. And like whoever's willing to move fast and go through cycles with you is a really good place to start. Like that's what we found with our partners. And just to like add some numbers, we were generating, but at the time that I left, it's probably much more now. But like at the time that I left, we were generating 10 million a year with our Japanese reseller. We were generating like about 5 million a year, 3 to 5 million a year with our Korean reseller. So these were like really big pieces of business for us. And this was like when the like Amplitude in total was probably at like 100 million ARR. So we were doing like maybe like 15-20% of our business with these resellers, which was like a massive amount at the time.
Yeah, that's huge. Awesome. All right. I don't want to keep you too long. So let's do the draw and see who is the lucky winner for this show. And it is Mary. Congrats, Mary. I'll reach out to you after the show just with more details on how you can claim your book. And then, Ty, if people like this was an incredibly helpful, you know, 30 minutes on how to expand globally. I learned a ton about how to leverage your partners, not just the way I thought you would, but also their technology partners and others to help build that ecosystem abroad. If people want to follow your journey and learn more, where can they follow your content?
LinkedIn is best. Yeah, LinkedIn is best. I'm active on there. I would say anyone who wants to dive into this more, I'll be at Catalyst in Denver in August. There's a bunch of the top people in partnerships going to be there, and so that's a good time to track me down to chat in person as well.
Awesome. I'll also be a Catalyst, so I'm really excited to see you there, Ty, and then also everybody who joined us today. I hope to see you in Catalyst as well in person. Thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks, Ty, and see
Thanks,
you in
everyone.
2 weeks.